Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Tony and I'm passionate about mystery, crime, and politics. On this channel, I'll be exploring some of the most fascinating and mysterious cases in history. So, if you're a fan of the extraordinary like me, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and don't forget to share. Buckle up, here we go. Today we're going to explore the harsh conditions of the Alabama Department of Corrections that led to the death of Victor Russo. In 1987, the most popular U.S. movies were Full Metal Jacket, The Princess Bride, Predator, and The Untouchables. It was also the year an Alabama court sentenced Victor Russo to life in prison without parole for robbery and murder. Russo wanted to serve his time quietly. At first, it looked like he might die of old age because jails had more staff and inmates were less packed. It was safer then. However, low staffing and overcrowding made life more precarious around 2013, a few years before he passed away after serving 32 years in prison. At the St. Clair Correctional Facility, an officer issued Russo a citation for failing to obey a direct order to shave with a razor. Russo irked a racist black officer when he told her he had a shaving profile, which allowed him to have a small amount of facial hair.
Since you want to be a smart mouth cracker, I'm gonna make sure you get what you're looking for.
After avoiding violence for 32 years in lockup, Victor Russo's luck began to run out. Since 2016, he has been stabbed in 2 separate assaults at 2 different prisons, both requiring outside treatment at a hospital. The total number of times he had been stabbed in 2016 was 16 times. The DOJ has noted that prisoner-on-prisoner incidents have increased dramatically from 2014 to 2019. Alabama's prisons have been struggling to manage its ever-growing prison population, with many existing prisons in a state of disrepair. In 2023, assaults in Alabama prisons increased by more than 41% when compared to the previous year. Alabama is currently facing a federal lawsuit over the conditions of its prisons, which the U.S. Justice Department alleges are riddled with prisoner-on-prisoner and guard-on-prisoner violence. According to a lawsuit Russo filed against the Alabama Department of Corrections, ADOC, for failing to provide sufficient security that could have prevented his assault. Russo was also a plaintiff in a 2014 class action lawsuit filed by Equal Justice Initiative, EJI, over conditions inside St. Clair Correctional. In 2017, the 2 sides reached a settlement, but mediation started after ADOC did not follow through on promised reforms, according to the DOJ. The officer that ordered Russo to shave cited Russo with a disciplinary violation, and he lost his housing assignment in the prison's honor dorm, a voluntary faith and character-based housing unit found in major ADOC facilities. The petty dispute would end up costing Russo his life. Aside from added benefits, the honor dorms are considered the safest places to live within a DOC's maximum and medium security facility. Within the first hour of being transferred into the general population, Russo claims he was robbed of his commissary items by 3 prisoners with knives, whom Russo suspected were high on methamphetamines. When he reported the incident, Russo said an ADOC captain suggested he get a knife to protect himself, even though a knife would be considered contraband. Russo asked to be moved to a safer dorm but did not want to identify the men who robbed him out of fear of retaliation. According to Russo's lawsuit, another callous captain sent Russo to segregation and issued a new disciplinary citation for ironically creating a security, safety, or health hazard, because he was afraid to identify the men who threatened him. Sadly, Russo's fears about identifying his antagonists would be proven justified. In addition to his conflict with administration, Russo would eventually make an enemy of an inmate named Blood TAK Edward Carrington, whose threats to Russo caused them to be separated. To free their leader, Blood T's gang ironically threatened Russo, his victim, for help. However, after Blood T stabbed a random prisoner during a robbery, his gang threatened Russo again to trade places. Mr. Russo said he requested another meeting with staff, where he told a warden and 3 other officers that Blood T's gang members were harassing him and forced Russo into lockup so Blood T could be released back into population. Those staff members told him they would remove Blood T from his enemies list so he wouldn't have any more problems with the gang. However, Russo said that didn't happen. Facing renewed threats from his bullies, Russo finally stood his ground and refused to swap places to release Blood T from segregation. As a consequence of that defiance, Blood T's allies stabbed Russo 16 times on April 20th, 2016. Bleeding and disoriented, he hobbled out of the dorm and asked an officer for help. An infirmary nurse cleaned up his injuries and called an ambulance. Russo spent 3 nights at UAB hospital, where he received 28 staples in his wounds and a tube placed in his chest to drain fluid around his organs, according to the class action lawsuit filed by EJI. After being hospital discharged, Russo was taken to Kilby Prison, where he was held in solitary confinement for weeks. "It was like I was being punished for being stabbed," Russo said. As time passed, Mr. Russo survived several more attacks, including being stabbed in the head. But as bad as it was, things got worse. In 2022, Victor Russo was taken to the hospital in Birmingham after he was found unresponsive with apparent blunt force trauma injuries in a cell at William Donaldson Correctional Facility. He died 2 days later. Alabama Department of Corrections spokeswoman Christy Simpson, in a response to Alabama Political Reporter's questions on March 3rd, said that on February 16, 2022, 7 days before he was found unresponsive in his cell, Russo did not follow a direct order and was subdued by correctional staff. One day before he collapsed, Mr. Russo wrote his last cry for help in a written letter to Donaldson Warden Phyllis Morgan, telling her that Lieutenant Muhammad Jenkins had repeatedly struck him in the head while he was helplessly handcuffed. He also claimed Mr. Jenkins sprayed him in the mouth with mace during the assault. Federal prosecutors accused Mr. Jenkins of assaulting Mr. Russo and another incarcerated man at Donaldson. However, the Alabama Department of Corrections asserted that foul play is not suspected in Mr. Russo's death and categorized it as accidental in published statistical reports. It looked like he would get away with murder. But on September 12, 2023, Lieutenant Muhammad Jenkins, aged 52, admitted guilt for using excessive force on an incarcerated individual and fabricating the official report to conceal his misconduct. Consequently, Jenkins received a prison sentence of approximately 7.5 years, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The Justice Department let Alabama know in 2019 that the conditions in its prisons, created by understaffing, culture, management deficiencies, corruption, policies, training, non-existent investigations, violence, illicit drugs, and sexual abuse, violate the Eighth Amendment rights of incarcerated people by subjecting them to an extreme risk of harm. Despite Victor Russo seeking help through the proper channels of prison administration and threatening a lawsuit, it still wasn't enough to prevent the frequent attacks he suffered by malicious inmates and indifferent officials that led to his inevitable but preventable murder. While it's true that Victor Russo committed murder, his cries for help didn't deserve to be ignored by callous prison officials or give license to a guard who would brutally kill him after he had already served decades of a life sentence for a crime he committed in his mid-20s. Even though Victor Russo's haunted eyes mirrored decades of regret and pain as vivid as the scars on his body, he still tried to make good despite personal risk. As an activist collaborating with social justice organizations, he filed lawsuits to improve prison conditions for all inmates. Some believe his litigation made him a troublesome target. Shortly before his passing, Russo granted an interview that exposed the unsanitary conditions within his prison and the lack of education to prevent the spread of STDs. Having paid his debt, Victor Russo's brutal death spotlights the urgency of prison reform in Alabama. However, Victor Russo wasn't the only one who paid his debt to justice. On September 12, 2023, Lieutenant Muhammad Jenkins, Russo's jailer and murderer, was sentenced to approximately 7.5 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The judge in Karma sent him to the same merciless prison where he had cowardly murdered Russo, the notorious William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility. I'm sure his now fellow prisoners will return his hospitality. Do you think former prison guard Muhammad Jenkins will survive his sentence? Please comment below. Like, subscribe, share, and comment.